Okay, good morning, everyone. We're in Revelation chapter 4. Revelation 4, that's where we'll be picking up. I have I guess, ambitious goal to get through. I have 3 classes for the next 3 Sundays. Byron will be back in 2 Sundays. He'll be preaching, but I'm going to teach his class, make it a little easier on him. And so I'll have the class the next 3 times. I'd like us to get to chapter 8 and verse 1 in 3 classes. Now that might be ambitious. If we do it, we do it. If we don't, we don't. That's okay. I think it will be easier to get to that than it was in the 7 churches because we won't have all the historical background and all of those different pieces. But you'll probably have plenty of questions along the way too. So let's go ahead and one thing I want us to think about is what we ended with last time was about the rewards for the faithful and their connection to the rewards at the end and how they overcame. I want us to talk a little bit about that, just to kind of summarize what we have discussed, and then I want us to get into chapter 4. So let's go ahead and let's start with a word of prayer, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for this day. We're thankful for all that you bless us with. We're thankful for your Son and the glory that he has and the beauty and the power. And we're thankful for all that you do for us. Father, help us to reflect on these churches and to consider the lessons that we can gain from their life and their example, and that we can live in a way that is similar and that gives you glory. In your Son's precious name, amen. All right, so just a little bit of review. Remember, what are the 7 churches? I have the answer already for you. But what are the 7?
Ephesus.
Okay.
Smyrna.
Okay.
Sardis.
Okay.
Pergamum.
Okay. Thyatira. What else?
Laodicea.
Laodicea. One more.
Philadelphia.
Okay. And so as we went through and looked at those churches, what were the rewards that were given out to those churches if they were faithful? Just kind of a smattering of them.
Crown of life.
Okay. White robes.
Power of the nations.
Okay, power of the nations.
Sit on the throne.
Yeah, sit on the throne.
A new name.
Yeah, a new name. Any others? Somebody was saying something.
The name will be in the book of life.
Okay, yeah, name is in the book of life.
Morning star.
Yeah, the morning star. Yeah.
White stone.
Okay, yeah, white stone. Yeah, maybe signifying pardon and a new life that is given to them. Yeah, I haven't mentioned a couple of the ones that I like. You have the tree of life, right? And then their name is in the New Jerusalem. So you've got these different pictures of these rewards that these are things that the world can't give you. These are things that the world ultimately couldn't take away from you either. And so these are the things that are put forward to the churches to motivate them to live faithful in the moment. So then what is the expectation of faithfulness for these churches? What are some of the things that we've laid out that they're expected to do in order to receive those rewards?
To endure, to be faithful to the end, to conquer.
Yeah, especially in light of what is coming with this persecution that's going to be taking place. What else?
Repentance.
Yeah, I mean, over and over again, it's repent. And it's of various different categories of things, which we'll talk a little bit about, but that's where it really starts. They have deviated and they're going the wrong way. They've got to turn around and come back to what the Lord's wanting. What else?
Be zealous.
Yeah, be zealous. Yeah. What else?
They need to reject the false teachers who are among them, like Jezebel.
Yeah. And we mentioned how much of that was causing them to conform to their culture of sexual immorality, of idol worship. And it's interesting how this works out, because you have kind of varying stages. Because in one case, you have people that are openly accepting the false doctrine and accepting the culture. In other places, you just have people that are tolerant of it. It's not that they actually agree with it or are participating in it, but they're not standing against it and removing it and being passionate against it. But what else? What are some of the other things that were the models for how they overcame? Maybe get a couple more, and then we'll get into chapter 4. Okay, yeah, that's more of like a reward, right? But what were they expected to do?
Works.
Yeah, works. And oftentimes that was mentioned. If you remember, what Byron has been emphasizing is right here, this middle verse in verse 23 is about Jesus being able to search mind and heart and giving according to each work. So some of them, there were works that were good that they needed to go back to. Some of them, their works have been better as of late, but they've still got a long way to go. And so you've got a lot of these different perspectives. So what might be your impression after the first couple of chapters here, first 3 chapters? If you were sitting in the audience and you've had this book read, let's say you're in one of these churches, what might be kind of your appraisal of this book that John has written to you? What's kind of your, I guess maybe your anticipation of how this is going to go and what's going to be discussed?
Sort of an acknowledgement that things have been tough, an indication they're going to get tougher, but you've got to be tough yourself and keep on keeping on.
Right. It's a push to check your allegiances one way or the other. How dedicated am I? How am I going to endure and ultimately overcome? Well, all of these things are important as we go into the rest of this book, because now we're going to get into more of the series of visions here, and of a section in Revelation that you're familiar with. It is most likely 4 and 5, with the exception of maybe the 7 churches or maybe the end. But 4 and 5 are ones that are very, very common, very familiar to us. And so what we're going to talk about is we're going to look at chapters 4 and 5, and it begins, the image here comes from this verse, where it's after this, he looks, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And then he goes through and he has the rest of this. We're going to look at chapters 4 and 5. We'll see, we may not be able to get through everything on this, so I don't want to just be like, hitting the gas store, we just have to get through it. But that's not really my intention. But a lot of this is imagery that's not really going to get into so many, specific, maybe there are practical applications, but it's not as self-reflective as some of the other sections. We're trying to get a picture here, and then we'll kind of anticipate what's going on. Now, I want to do the exact same thing that Byron's been doing. We're going to do the observation, and then interpretation, then application. Now, what I've done, though, on this is I modified it just a little bit, is I want us to do observation and interpretation on 4, and then I want us to do observation and interpretation on 5, and then come to the application at the end. And the reason is I was going through and writing my notes. My same applications at the end of 4 were the same ones as the end of chapter 5, because it's all one scene here together. So if somebody would like to, let's go ahead and read here verses 1 through 11 as we have this picture into the divine council, the heavenly throne scene.
After this, I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And the first voice, which I had heard speaking to me like a trumpet, said, come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this. At once I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne stood in heaven, with one seated on the throne. And he who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian, and about the throne was a rainbow that had the appearance of an emerald. Around the throne were 24 thrones, and seated on the thrones were 24 elders, clothed in white garments, with golden crowns on their heads. From the throne came flashes of lightning and rumblings, and peals of thunder. And before the throne were burning 7 torches of fire, which are the 7 spirits of God. And before the throne there was, as it were, a sea of glass like crystal. And around the throne, on each side of the throne, are 4 living creatures, full of eyes in front and behind. The first creature like a lion, the second creature like an ox, the third living creature with the face of a man, and the fourth living creature like an eagle in flight. And the 4 living creatures, each of them with 6 wings, are full of eyes all around and within. All day and night they never cease to say, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. And whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to him who is seated on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who is seated on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They cast their crowns before the throne, saying, Worthy are you, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and by your will they existed and are created.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Now, again, as I mentioned, we're kind of in the middle of the vision. 4 and 5 go together. But let's go ahead and ask this question. What words stand out to you? What words or phrases stand out to you as you read through this section?
Worthy are you.
Worthy. Yeah, worthy are you. And I want to mention one thing on the worthy are you. Notice what God is seen as worthy for in verse 11, and then just kind of log that away, because the Lamb is going to be seen as worthy as well, but it's for a different reason. What else?
Lightning and thunder.
Okay, lightning and thunders. The throne.
Voice like a trumpet.
Okay. Yeah, we've seen that one before, right? Okay, what else? Yeah, the torches of fire. Yeah. What else?
Golden crowns.
Okay, thank you.
7 spirits of God.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. What else? Any other ones?
24 thrones and 24 elders.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of descriptors here, right? This is one of those times, as I said, it's very different than what we just read, where he's describing something to you and me. I wish I could have had a picture of it, but the whole point of this kind of literature is it's so well described, you can see it. Lots of likes in this as well. What else?
A door.
Okay, good.
Sea of glass.
Sea of glass. Yeah, we're going to talk some about that. Any other things? So no mention of the animals, right? You've got a lion, an ox, an eagle, and then the face of a man. Anything else we want to do before we kind of walk through it? All right, so what are your initial impressions just reading through chapter 4? Where it's at in this book, I think, is going to be important. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. But what are your impressions as you read 1 through 11? Like what? Go ahead.
It's all about worship.
Yeah, it's worship over and over and over. There's worship all through this. What else? Any initial impressions?
There's an open door in heaven.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? The description there, and yeah, we'll talk about that. Are you struck with the majesty? I mean, that's really one of the main things that I think is being done here. Because when you look at what was before this section, you have Jesus' revelation and the letters to the churches, but I believe this section is particularly important as it relates to the rest of this book to show who is really on the throne, who really has control of the world, who's really orienting things, and the beauty and power that he has. Okay, so let's kind of walk through these observation questions. I didn't write them all down on the slide, but I just want to kind of walk through the text here. So what was before this section? He mentions verse 1 after this. So what was before it?
Letters to the churches.
Yeah, and also Jesus' revelation, right, of who he is, his appearance. Okay, what did John see open, and where was it located?
Door in heaven.
Yeah, a door in heaven. Okay, what voice did he hear? What did the voice say, and what would he show him?
Things are going to take place after this.
Yeah, okay, things are going to take place after this, which is apparently referring to the letter and everything that was there. Whose voice was it?
Seems to be Jesus based on chapter 1. And he heard the voice like a trumpet and turned and saw.
Yeah, that's at least what I came up with. That's what I came up with. And what else did he say? He mentioned showing them, and we mentioned who it was, but right there in the middle, he said something as well.
Come up here.
Yeah, come up here. Okay, so this is very apocalyptic because what God does is he doesn't change the circumstances on earth usually. What he does is he takes someone to heaven to look at the scene differently. And that different perspective, heaven's perspective, changes everything. And that's what he's doing here. Everybody with me? Okay. What was John in? Okay, the Spirit. This is a big thing we'll talk a little bit more about, but that's very big from the book of Ezekiel. What did John see, and where was it? Yeah, a throne. Yeah, a throne in heaven. What did the one who sat on the throne look like? You have to kind of brush up on your precious stones a little bit.
Described as a shimmering stone, so beautifully, you had to use adjectives that they would understand.
Yeah,
The jasper and the sardine, and the other things, emerald.
yeah,
I mean, all these are just, they were the best of the best that was available at that time.
yeah.
Stones.
And they're still really important. Go ahead, Ed.
Elaborate on the significance of being in the Spirit. Does that mean that it is a vision as opposed to a physical transportation to heaven?
Well, I've got that in my interpretation questions. So we got to do the observation first, and then we'll get there. There's a few things here I want to ask you. I want to ask you to think through as well. So let's keep going. What was around the throne? You mentioned a little bit of this already, DJ, but what else? Okay, 24 thrones. What else?
Rainbow.
Yeah, rainbow. Okay, good. What else?
It's 4 living creatures.
Okay, yeah, 4 living creatures. We mentioned their thrones. What was on the thrones? Yeah, the 24 elders. Okay, good. And what are the elders clothed with?
White garments.
Yeah, white garments and golden crowns. Okay, good. What came from the throne? Bill, you mentioned this was a word that stood out to you. Yeah, lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder. Now, what was before the throne? So again, as we're walking through this, imagine John is in the heavenly throne scene. So he's looking and he's seeing one, and then now he's like, it's like he looks down and he's seeing what's before it. It's not like, it's just like you are before me, is how the word's being used. Okay, so what's there?
The crystal sea.
Okay, the crystal sea, a sea of glass like crystal. What else? Yeah, so there's 7 lamps before them. And so this is one of the great things about apocalyptic literature. Like we probably have, times where like, what does this mean? We're kind of confused on it. There's times where he uses something that you're probably not going to be familiar with and actually tells you what they are. So what are the 7 burning torches of fire? Yeah, the 7 spirits of God. And we've seen that before, right? Who has those already? Or who is, look at chapter 3 and verse 1, just by comparison. One of the things that is said about Jesus is he's the words of him who has the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars, which we'll see some more detail about that a little bit later in chapter 5. Okay, what was around the throne on each side? Yeah, 24 elders. What were you going to say?
The 4 living creatures.
Yeah, the 4 living creatures. Okay, and what are the 4 living creatures like? Again, this is a big word in apocalyptic literature to give descriptions here.
First one's like a lion, second one like an ox, the third one with the face of a man, the fourth one like an eagle and falcon.
Okay, keep going. There's more description. So
They have 6 wings, they're full of eyes around and within, and all day and night they're praising God.
all right, good. Okay, what are they saying?
Holy, holy, holy. Lord
Okay.
God Almighty,
And what else?
which was and is to come.
Okay, I want that last phrase because it's important, because the same thing is said about the Lamb, and that's a very important description. Okay, what happens to the living creature when the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks?
The elders come down off their thrones, fall down and worship,
Right. And what else do they do?
cast their crowns.
Yeah, okay, good. All right, and what do the elders say?
Worthy are you, O Lord, and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they exist.
Okay, so what you have almost as we look at it is glory and power, but it's almost like a symphony of worship, right? Here's an action and a reaction. You've got the 4 living creatures, here's the 24 elders, and you've got this kind of cyclical process to where God is constantly adored. Okay, so now let's get into what does this text mean? So what text forms the foundation and background of this text? And I'm teaching while Byron's gone, so I get to do some of what I want to do. I like to know the background text on this. There's multiple texts that I think would fit into this, but what texts come to your mind that you've read in other parts of the Bible that if you hadn't read those parts, this would be really, really strange? So what helps form it?
Ezekiel 1.
Yeah, Ezekiel 1. I mean, it is almost verbatim, the descriptions there of the throne chariot. Okay, what other ones? I just talked about it 2 weeks ago. Okay, all right, yeah, okay, so Daniel is great. I will say this, Daniel 7, I think, is the primary one. And this is actually a fulfillment of this, and it's actually connected to Daniel 7, as well as Acts chapter 1. There's a lot of similarities about the Son of Man coming to take possession of the kingdom. What I was referring to is, remember Isaiah 6? Any of this sound like that? In fact, what they say, holy, 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 it's ripped right out of Isaiah 6. It's the same type of description. One other one that might not seem so familiar is actually 1 Kings chapter 22. When we talk about spiritual beings, they were talking about, I think it was Ahab, causing him to fall. And there's a discussion in the heavenly realm about what to do with this king. So you've got those kind of pictures that are there. And then we mentioned this a little bit. Where else do we hear lightnings, rumblings, thunders, and the sound of a trumpet? Or a voice? I think it's a voice that sounds like a trumpet, or at least the sound of a trumpet.
Mount Sinai.
Mount Sinai, exactly. And then, so anyway, these are important texts. In fact, if you went back to Daniel 7, I was looking at this in one of the books I was reading. There are 14 parallels to Daniel 7 between Revelation 4 and 5. I mean, it is almost step by step by step, very, very similar. Okay, so y'all help me out with some of the interpretation here. What does the door in heaven mean?
I just think symbolically, we don't know what's going on. It's kind of God's pulling back the curtains and saying, here, take a look.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting about this is actually in pop culture today. It's not unusual to have a door that opens to a completely different area. I don't know what you think much about the Matrix. There's all kinds of things that are not good about that. But one thing they do have periodically is a door. You come to the door and you step through the door, it's completely different. Maybe something else is Narnia. Okay? Narnia is another parallel where you come to a door and it opens to a completely different place. But yet your experience there totally changes and colors the experience you had on the other side of the door. Okay? Lots of those kind of things. Alice in Wonderland, she goes through a door. So lots of those kind of concepts. So it is a point of access that God obviously opens up and allows. So it's kind of an interesting idea. It's like he's out there looking up at the sky, and then boom, there's a door, and it's like it gets opened, and he says, come up here, and he's going to show him. And so he's able to go in, see heaven's perspective. And so this is how God is expecting faithfulness to come about. It is by changing our perspective, coming to heaven's perspective on these particular events. But one of the things that I think is important, and you mentioned this a little bit, how much of this could John have understood on his own? He's got to have the door, right? The door has to be opened for him to come into it. And so he's unable to discern this without the door. And so there is a sense in which the revelation's there. Any comments, things you want to add on that?
Interesting. Jesus says, I am the door. And here he's calling somebody through the door.
Yeah. And doors are dividers. I mean, we just kind of assume that, but it is my space versus out there in the world. And I mean, there's all kinds of those different things. So when we look at it, there is access into heaven, but it's probably a door we might think that's locked from the inside. Only God is going to let us in there to have that type of perspective. Okay, now Ed, what does it mean that John was in the Spirit?
That was a question, not a statement.
Okay, so what do y'all think? I mean, I know what I think, but what do you think?
His physical presence couldn't pass through to that state.
Okay. Yeah, because he's got the body of sin and death and all of those kind of things, right? He doesn't have the glorified body like Jesus. What else? Maybe Old Testament might help us here a little bit. Oh, go ahead.
It also says in the verse before that it's, come up here and I will show you what must take place after these things. And then he says, here I am in the Spirit. So this could potentially be something looking forward. You can't physically transport somebody forward in time. And then the doorway also could represent this, you're going to transition from the now into the future. You're going to step through this door.
Yeah.
And the Spirit is what's going to go through and see what lies in the future on the other side of this doorway threshold.
Yeah, very good, very good. Yeah, so Old Testament might help us a little bit. I mentioned that this is something that is said a lot with Ezekiel. Go ahead.
I guess one thing I thought of that's relevant is when Paul talked about his vision, he said, I saw this, but whether in the body or in the spirit, I don't know.
Exactly. Okay, that was right here in my notes as well. It is much like Paul, is that it's what we would call an out-of-body experience to a certain extent, but it's not one of those that's like seen by our culture. It's something caused by God to where he is still himself, right? But he doesn't have his body. And so I think that's the idea. Ezekiel has this happen periodically. In one of the cases, he was over in Babylon and he is transported from there to Jerusalem. And if you remember in chapter 9, it's like he has a virtual tour basically through what was going on in Jerusalem. and yet he's hundreds of miles away. And so that's the same kind of thing, except instead of being in Jerusalem, he's obviously put there in heaven. So I don't think he's talking about the Holy Spirit as much as he's talking about in a spiritual form. Okay, other things you want to add on that?
The Valley of Dry Bones. The Spirit of
Yeah, there's all kinds of different things. All right, who's seated on the throne, and how do you know it? We don't have his name, but how do you know who this is? Okay, that's right. The elders are on their thrones. I was thinking about the throne, but you're right. Yeah.
There's one seated on the throne. One seated. So I would think that would mean the one.
Yeah. So the way the parallels to Daniel 7 has this as the Ancient of Days. So this is the Father, and just keep looking though, and keep a close eye. Remember that what is attributed to Jesus is also going to be attributed to him. What are the 7 torches of fire?
The 7 spirits of God.
Okay, all right. So, what are the 7 spirits of God? Remember, that's one of the markers for the Holy Spirit. That's what he's referring to. And so he is constantly before the throne. Now, I love Old Testament allusion here. This is Zechariah as well. Remember, there were 7 burning lamps in Zechariah's vision there. And he gave details regarding the lamp. And actually, one of the things that he talks about there is about how these things are not going to be accomplished by physical hands. They're going to be accomplished by his Spirit. It is his work, his power that is done. A couple of things, as I mentioned, chapter 3 and verse 1, Jesus is said to possess them, but they're reconfigured in chapter 5 and verse 6, where it's 7 horns and 7 eyes now that the Lamb has that are also the 7 spirits that are sent into all the earth. So we'll talk about that more in just a minute. All right, let's ask this question. What is the sea of glass? Anybody have an idea what that is? That'd be a really cool thing to see, I'm just going to say. We try to imitate that in various different things that we do today, but what is that? Any thoughts?
Well, in fishing terms, it's one of the best days to be out on the water.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, all right. And I think that honestly that's an important thing for how the sea is described later. It's a calmness, right? There's a calmness that is brought up about it. What else?
It's in 15:2 as well. I saw something like a sea of glass mingled with fire. Those who have victory over the beast, over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, were standing on the sea of glass, having harps of God.
Yeah, so that seemed like that's a really good picture of how the word sea is used. And so in that picture, it seems like the calm sea has now been replaced with what else? All right, how has the sea changed in that particular section?
It's firm enough that they're standing on it.
Yeah, well, yeah, they're standing on it, right?
But
And
also it's mingled with fire.
right, the situation has now changed. There's destruction that's related to it, it seems, as the picture. Let me give you a text that you may not be aware of. I didn't know until I was going back and looking at this. In Ezekiel 1 and verse 22, you have another one of these same parallels. And this is, remember in Ezekiel, it's the heavenly throne scene where God is riding on the cherubim, but he's not in heaven. He's coming down to Jerusalem, or in this case, he's actually coming down to Babylon. But he's looking up at the throne chariot in heaven, and he says, over the heads of the living creatures, there was the likeness of an expanse, shining like awe-inspiring crystal, spread out above their heads. Now, if you kind of put these things together, this is my interpretation, trying to understand what the texts are saying here, is that the glass seems to, in a sense, be like the floor of heaven. And so it's possible, as he's saying here, they're out of heaven, he's got it behind. In the case of Revelation, it's there before them. And so it's possible that here you have the nations and the powers are at ease, and here's God's ability to look out and to see what's going on in the world. And yet, the way the sea is described, though, in other places, like Daniel 7 and Revelation 13, is this is where the evil beasts of the nations come up, and they rise up out of that. And so that would kind of connect with what we read there in Revelation, that here now you've got this destruction that is kind of where God is seeing it out there in front. So that's the best I got. Anybody else have some? Go ahead.
It just makes me go back to Genesis 1 in verse 6. God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters. Let it separate the waters from the waters." God made the expanse, separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which are above the expanse.
Mm-hmm.
It was so. God called the expanse heaven.
Right.
So it's just, I guess, makes me think of the sea of glass, the water above the expanse.
Yeah. It does. To me, it seems to be that connected with the door is this. It's the ordered division that God has between heaven and earth, right? That and yet the combination with fire seems kind of strange, but yet in Daniel 7, when he looks at it there, it's fire that's coming from the throne. But that's a judgment scene, right? Which is very similar to what we have here in Revelation as well. Okay. Questions? Other thoughts? Maybe some passages you hadn't thought about. I hadn't thought about those either. What are the four living creatures, and how do you know what they are? Yeah. Okay. This is a cherubim, and it's not a little baby, a naked baby with a couple of cute little wings. Okay. These are the cherubim, or the way they're described in Isaiah, is they are seraphim. The reason there's a different word is the word seraph or seraphim is plural. Seraph is one that is a burning one, and that's a description of them. So that seraphim and cherubim, as I understand them, are interchangeable. But why are they said to be full of eyes around and within? That's a really weird description. You've only got two eyes. I've only got two as well.
See everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a symbol, right? And it's actually one thing that was taken back from Zechariah as well. You remember, if I remember right, one of the stones is covered with eyes. And that's the same picture. It's an all presence, an all awareness. It's almost like a fly. Remember, flies covered with eyes. You can't get around it. Like it can see. It's the same kind of description there. Another comparable description is from Ezekiel, where he talks about the wheel within a wheel, which isn't good engineering, by the way. That'd be kind of a strange thing. But the idea is that it is accessible at any point. It is movable to any situation. So they're present at any place, and they're able to see everything. Okay, who are the 24 elders here? I'm not making as much progress as I'd hoped, so that's all right.
I've heard it described as like the 12 tribes of Israel and 12 apostles.
Yeah, and so I think that's about the best guess we've got. The reason I believe that is in Revelation 21, you have the two are used in combination to describe the New Jerusalem. So you've got the 12, I think it's the apostles that are the foundation, maybe they're the gates. And then anyway, it's foundation and gates are the two together. Okay, and then the gates are the nation or the tribes. Go ahead.
Something I thought about, this may be baseless, but the two things we know about the elders are that they're on thrones, which implies that they're ruling, and that they're wearing white garments.
Right.
Both of those things are things that are said about those who conquer in the letters to the churches.
Right.
Could it be those just represent people who have conquered, represent our possible future?
Yeah, so there will be more people that are on thrones with white garments throughout the book.
Yeah.
So there just seems to be 24 specific here, but what's true of them is true of us, right? So go ahead. You can say something? Jeff, go ahead.
The crowns actually, that's kind of interesting with the victor, being victorious, because in Revelation, crowns, the beast wears crowns, and that's the word diadem, which is royal, kind of a symbol of royalty.
Right.
But whenever it's talking about Jesus, or those of us who have come through the tribulation, it's a different word, stephanos, which was a victor's crown.
Mm-hmm.
It's a completely different word.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, why are the living creatures and elders responding this way?
Because he's worthy.
Yeah, exactly. All right, what I'm going to do is, I wasn't going to do application, but since I'm not going to get to more of what I want us to do, I want us to do some here in a second. So I want to ask kind of one other question, and then I want us to do some application. Why is this part at this point in the book? What do you think? I mean, they didn't just throw down random things on the paper, right? I mean, they are formulating these in a very specific order to say a message. So why this point in the book?
Without getting ahead, to your point is, when the Lamb comes, he's going to be equated with the same power that the one on the throne has now. So all the glory and the dominion and everything that you see, all the worship being given to the one on the throne, the Ancient Days, is equated to the Lamb. So for us to understand what the Lamb's getting and obtaining by being this, Lamb of Judah, or this Lion of Judah, and the Lamb saying they're slain, helps us to understand this is what he's obtaining as a child.
Yeah. That's good. What else?
It insinuates authority and power. So these are all visions that they would have of things that kings on earth would have.
Right.
So it's a very strong analogy, saying this is beyond what you can even imagine in a way, and using that really visual language to just say this is truly from authority.
Yeah.
It needs to be taken that way.
Yeah, it's, I think for me, what it points to, and we don't really always think about this word, but it shows his sovereignty. And that's a very important and powerful word. But it's over the entire world, and particularly for this book, it's over human history. This isn't going, it's not like God's like, oh, I'm not sure what's going on. I don't know what the plan is. He has been on the throne the entire time. He knows it from beginning to end. He's in complete control. And it'll be shown as well with the unfolding of the plan of redemption. Now, what I want us to do, and I think this will set us up very good for this morning, how does this change your worship? There's a reason that we come to this text. How does this change your worship, or the way you think about what we're about to engage in, kind of already engaged in?
Worship isn't about us. So when people say, I didn't get anything out of it, or I need this so I can experience this, no.
Yeah.
It's about what does God deserve and what does God demand. Yeah.
And we have a great definition of worship. We think of worship just as, singing or whatever. Worship, specifically in Revelation, is falling down on your face and throwing the crown to the one that is worthy. That's what we do in our worship. It's not about us. It's about acknowledging how great and how worthy He is. And so we've got to keep writing that on, because it's very easy to say, hey, the songs weren't very good today. Sermon wasn't very good. Didn't get much out of worship. And that's not how worship is. It's not about us. It's about Him. But when we give Him what He is due, we are then changed to be what we need to be. All right, we'll talk about that more next week. And we'll pick up at chapter 5. And we'll see how far we can get.